Okay, well, whatever. Today marks the 7th anniversary of the Upper Big Branch mine disaster in West Virginia, which took the lives of 29 miners, the worst coal mine disaster in this country in 40 years. This mine explosion was not caused by unforeseeable circumstances or an act of God. The cause, according to numerous investigation and reports and a criminal trial, was the reckless conduct of corporate executives who consistently put coal production ahead of mine safety and treated citations of the Mine Safety and Health Administration, MNSHA, as a cost of doing business. Today, MNSHA could use tools that MNSHA could use to hold accountable those rogue operators has been ineffective. Multiple investigations, including one requested by then Governor Joe Manchin, identified reforms that are needed to update our nation's mine health and safety laws. Unfortunately, the Republicans have been unwilling to move a single one of these reform bills. Even the Mine Safety and Health Administration even though the Mine Safety and has repeatedly asked for these better tools. The committee has heard firsthand from miners, mine safety inspectors, mine engineers, and the families of the Upper Big Branch miners about the need to close loopholes in the Mine Act so our safety laws could effectively deter the kinds of lawless conduct which so callously took the lives of those in the UBB miners. That's why we're reintroducing the Robert C. Byrd Mine Safety Protection Act, which includes provisions making a meaningful deterrent for criminal violations of the Act, making it possible for felony charges to be brought against mine operators who knowingly violates a mandatory safety and health standard which recklessly and seriously endangers the health and safety of miners. It empowers MNSHA with subpoena power to conduct inspections and investigations. An agency whose mission it is to protect miners from serious injury needs that basic tool. Protecting miners who speak out on safety conditions. Miners would receive protections allowing them to speak freely during investigations, and criminal sanctions would be brought against those who interfere with the livelihood of those who report safety violations to officials. Senator Casey will talk more about that bill in a minute. I'm also pleased to be joined by Representative Matt Cartwright, who will be reintroducing the Black Lung Benefits Improvement Bill. This bill would level the playing field for disabled coal miners and their survivors in securing the very modest benefits provided under the Black Lung legislation. Over the past year, the Education and Workforce Committee has conducted 3 bipartisan roundtables here in Capitol Hill and in Southwest Virginia to assess the strengths and weaknesses of this program. During the roundtables, we heard firsthand that the Black Lung Benefits Program needs improvements to provide for fairness and more efficient adjudication of claims. That bill will provide for all parties to share medical information developed in connection with the Black Lung claim, whether that evidence is introduced or not, and that way you can avoid cherry picking of medical evidence. The Department of Labor will provide more robust assistance to miners in developing medical evidence. And the Department of Labor will provide legal recourse for miners and survivors whose claims were improperly denied due to discredited, bogus medical investigations, allowing them to refile fresh claims. The bill also provides incentives to attract attorneys willing to represent miners and their survivors in the Black Lung program. Too often, miners do not have legal representation, and being disabled and not working, do not have the financial ability to pay for sophisticated medical testing to support their claim. It's one thing to delay the attorney's fees to the end of the case. Many of them don't have the basic expenses that will help develop their claim. The bill takes steps to solve the problem, and I'm happy to be joined by true champions of our nation's miners, my colleagues from Pennsylvania, Senator Casey and Representative Cartwright, and Senator Manchin from West Virginia, as we work to strengthen the protections of our nation's miners and their families. And they will speak in that order. Senator Casey.
Representative, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank Representative Scott for getting us started today and for his leadership on this issue, especially at this time. I'm happy to be joined by my Senate colleague and my friend Joe Manchin senator from West Virginia, someone who's been working on these issues for many, many years, both as governor and senator. And, of course, I'm also grateful to be with Representative Cartwright, who is my congressman. I'm one of his constituents, and he's worked on these issues and worker issues for many, many years. Just grateful to have this opportunity. We meet here to talk about this legislation at a particularly significant time. President Trump has proposed a 21% cut in the Department of Labor, which would surely harm mine inspections and enforcement. That's a bad idea. We should stop him from doing that. As President Trump's nominee, the Secretary of Labor nominee would not commit to me when we sent him written questions, would not commit to me that he would protect mine safety and black lung regulations. Instead, he cited President Trump's vow to review and roll back regulations. That's also a bad idea, and I hope he would rethink that. The reason we need this legislation, the so-called Robert Byrd legislation, is because there's so much unfinished business since the terrible tragedy 7 years ago, the Upper Big Branch disaster. Senator Manchin lived through that tragedy. His community lived through that. His whole state did. The Robert Byrd Mine and Workplace Safety and Health Act would provide a number of new tools for MSHA to use in its basic responsibility to protect miners. At least three things would result from this legislation. MSHA would be given tools to, number one, crack down on mines with serious and repeat violations. That's essential. Number two, it would allow an increase in penalties for repeat offenders. And number three, would reform a system that allows millions in safety fines to go unpaid. It's almost hard to believe we have to legislate about this in this day and age. This isn't the turn of the last century in places like Pennsylvania and other places where the industry had unfettered power to do whatever they wanted. We've had generations, not just years and decades, but generations of legislation and procedure in place. And still today, we're not meeting the obligation to protect those miners. Among the most difficult and dangerous work you could ever imagine. So we still have a ways to go. What we need here is some Republican help. We need Republicans to help us on this legislation, both the Byrd legislation as well as black lung legislation. We need their help when it comes to budgets and the dollars that go to protect miners and their families. We need their help to pass the health care and pension legislation, which Democrats have been carrying pretty much on our own shoulders for a long time. We've got a couple of Republican co-sponsors on that, but it's still not done yet. So my message to my Republican friends in the House and the Senate and all the way to the Oval Office is just do what you told us you were going to do. You told us you were going to help coal miners. You told us that you were going to protect them. You campaigned on it. You made promises. Start keeping your promise, President Trump and Republican members of Congress. Help us with a list of legislative items and help us make sure that the budget reflects those promises and that the budget of the United States of America, the enforcement budget especially, reflects not just those promises but our values as a nation. So I'm happy to be here today and introduce Representative Cartwright.
Thank you, Senator Casey. It's an honor to join with Senator Manchin, Representative Scott. It's not an accident that two of us up here on this dais are from Scranton. If you ever visited Scranton, you would see the courthouse, and outside the courthouse there are the obligatory statues of George Washington and other national figures. But one of the statues that is there doesn't occur in other places, and it is the statue of John Mitchell, the great mine workers labor leader who came to Scranton in the turn of the last century. And he found the strife going on between all the ethnic groups that the mine owners were able to play off against each other. and he was able to organize them, stop that inter-ethnic strife, and get them together, and they went out on strike. 147,000 men, all men from the mines, went on strike for 9 months. And the privations and the suffering and the starvation that occurred during those 9 months were unspeakable. But it led to the great arbitration of 1903, forced by President Teddy Roosevelt, at which the mine workers were represented by Clarence Darrow, right in our courthouse in Scranton, Pennsylvania. There's a lot of pride that brings us here from Scranton today, and to stand up for mine safety and for mine workers, it comes naturally to those of us from that place. Black lung is a serious and debilitating disease that thousands of coal miners have suffered for too long with insufficient protections for their benefits. As if the burden of this disease were not hardship enough, miners with it often contend with coal company lawyers determined to exploit loopholes, preventing miners and their families from receiving the benefits they deserve. The Black Lung Benefit Improvement Act is legislation needed to ensure that miners are able to obtain unbiased medical evidence, ample representation, and up-to-date benefit payments. This legislation will ensure that coal miners receive fair treatment when claiming their benefits. It will expand legal assistance to miners so they're fairly represented when their claims are challenged. It will adjust benefits to increase with the cost of living, and it will improve administrative procedures to eliminate unnecessary delays in the distribution of benefits. These are just some of the important and long overdue changes that this bill would implement. I do want to thank my colleagues who have joined me in the fight for this legislation and what it seeks to accomplish on behalf of coal miners, principally and primarily Bob Casey for his leadership in the Senate, and it was in his office that almost all of this bill was drafted. My colleagues in the House of Representatives, Bobby Scott and Frederica Wilson as well. I also appreciate the work of the House Committee on Education and Workforce and the Senate Help Committee for considering this bill and reporting it out favorably. Too many of our coal miners who have worked hard helping us meet our nation's energy needs suffer from black lung, and in the words of Clarence Darrow, these were the men who go down into the earth and suffer dangers greater than the men who go out upon the sea or across the land in battle. These are people who risked their lives and ended up with black lung disease. These victims should not be neglected or cheated out of their benefits. I look forward to working with my colleagues to make sure that that does not happen, and I thank you for your attention. Senator Manchin.
Well, first of all, thank you to Ranking Member Scott, to my dear, dear friend Senator Casey, and to Representative Cartwright for being here and working and being champions on these bills that we all are hold near and dear to us. Let me just say, I come from a little coal mining community of Farmington. I was born and raised in a small community that had 8 of the largest mines within a walking distance from my house. So we've lived it and breathed it, and I've been through the tragedies. We speak about Robert C. Byrd, mine safety. It's synonymous with basically West Virginia mining. The greatest tragedy in mining history was in Monongah, West Virginia. At that time, an explosion back in 1907. I think officially it killed 300 and plus men got killed, but they say the unofficial count was way over 500 because they had families in there with them. They got paid by the tonnage. So basically, the more a family could take in, the more hands they had working, the more mouths they could feed. And that's how they did it. So basically, when you think about the history of mining and what we have, if we're sitting in the only superpower left in the world, we wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for the men, and today men and women, who've basically given us that domestic energy, which was able for us to defend ourselves in every war, build the greatest industrial might the world has ever known. They did that. They did that with their hands, their sweat, and their brow, and their blood. In West Virginia, too much blood's been shed. We talk about mine safety. We're here basically on the 7th anniversary of the UBB. I was governor at the time. I went through 3 mine disasters. I had Sago, Aracoma, and then UBB. UBB was the worst at 29 miners. Each one of those disasters and those horrible tragedies, I sat with the miners' families for the entire 2 and 3 and 4 days at a time until we knew the whereabouts and what was the outcome. And as you know, the outcome was not always favorable. But I talk, and what I know from the mining industry, in 1954, I lost my neighbor. I was 7 years of age, and my neighbor used to play ball with me every day, and he didn't come home one day, and I asked his wife, Marcia, my dear friend, and I said, Marcia, is Pinchy coming home? And he says, no, he'll be late today. Second day, Pinchy is still going to be late. And the third day, she had to tell me Pinchy wasn't coming home to play ball anymore. That's at 7 years of age. Fast forward, I'm 21 years of age. Number 9 blows. 68 men. 68 men. This is my uncle, men I played ball with in high school, and I lost my uncle, and I lost my friends. So I've been through it, and I've sat through this. And I can tell you, I can go to a mine, I can go down into the shower house or go down into the pits, and I can talk to them. I can tell if it's a safe mine or not. I can tell if the atmosphere there is based around safety first. Production will come. Production will always come if the miner and the safety of a miner is put first. And if a miner has the ability to stop production because they're in unsafe conditions, I'll guarantee you that'll be a very prosperous and a very productive mine. But for some reason, the belief has been different. Push, push, push for production. Don't worry about safety in any way, shape, or form. And I'll guarantee you, we've already had court cases that determine the production and profits were put before a person's safety. And I've told people before, I can tell you what a piece of mining equipment costs. I can tell you what a roof boulder, continuous mine cutter, a buggy, I can tell you what those costs are. I can't tell you what the cost of a miner is because they're priceless. You can't replace them. You can't put a price on them. And the mines don't run without them. So all we're asking for is to make sure with the bird's mine safety is to make sure that safety and protection is put first. That's all. That is not. And basically the people that put them in harm's way should be put in harm's way themselves when they do that. That's all we've asked for in this bill. It's common sense. Black lung. I've watched people get themselves absolutely physically sick trying to collect the black lung. I guarantee you, if a person spends 5 years or more down inside in the mine, they're going to be exposed to black lung. Why they make them jump through every legal hoop in the world and then basically just wear them out and defeat them to the point of where it's not ever going to be attainable is absolutely criminal. It is criminal and inhumane. And what Representative Cartwright's bill, we've signed on to both, that Bobby and I have worked on both of those on our side, and we'll work on them any way we possibly can. But there's no reason that this reasonable situation and these reasonable requests and the reasonable protection put in for people that are still doing some of the toughest jobs. My little state of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Southwest Virginia, parts of Tennessee, we've done the heavy lifting. We don't mind doing the heavy lifting. We don't complain. Just make sure you're treating us right. Make sure you give us every chance we can to come home at night and be able to see our family. Every person should expect a person that works in the mine to come home safe at night. No one should be sitting waiting to hear what happened and to find out the worst. So these pieces of legislation would greatly improve the safety of a miner. It would greatly improve the protection of a miner and give them basically some compensation for the exposure they've had. We're working right now on the Miners Protection Act, which basically guarantees from 1946 the health care benefits and the pensions. It is absolutely ridiculous for us to be held up by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle not to let that piece of legislation go forward. We had pay-fors. We did everything possible, went through the normal course, and then we've still been blocked. And we're still working very hard to make sure that the majority leader on the Senate side will put that piece of legislation up for a vote. I just appreciate being here with my colleagues and knowing that they're going to be fighting and continue to fight for the people who have given us the greatest country on earth, the superpower of the world, the hope of the world, the United States of America. And it's been because of domestic energy that basically was extracted right on our own home soil by the miners. Thank you. And back to Ranking Member Scott.
Any questions? If not, we, yes?
Your name and your outlet.
Yeah, Maggie Anderson from NPR. What has been added in response to the undercounted cases of progressive massive fibrosis?
We've been working on that, trying to get a count. The 3 agencies involved have indicated that they're going to get together, compare their notes to get a much more accurate count. So there's nothing in the specifically in the legislation, but we're working on that independently. And we expect much more accurate numbers because the numbers that have been reported obviously were inaccurate.
And there's some provisions in the bills that are about lowering the thresholds of accounts. Are you hoping that will give you a more accurate?
The lower thresholds.
Of like courts and dust in the air. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
There's a study provision in the bill,
Yeah.
which asks MSHA to do a retrospective review after they've had 5 years of an opportunity to implement the new respirable dust rule that fully became effective on August 1st of 2016. There's a 5-year look-back period, which will then assess, is that adequate, is it working, and will also assess the question of progressive massive fibrosis and the growth in the number of those cases that Congressman Scott spoke about. So that there will be a reassessment of the court standard at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Your name and outlet.
Niels Lesniewski with roll call, particularly for the senators, because I think that the problem that Senator Manchin mentioned with the health benefits has been something that you two have been working on the Senate side. What are the prospects that there's going to be anything other than another sort of short-term extension in the omnibus or continuing resolution or whatever the government funding bill is?
Well, I can tell you we're not accepting anything less than a full pay. Basically, if you can't fix, and the promise has been made, so you all know, this 1946 piece of legislation basically was coming from the mine, the coal that was mined. There was a set aside from every ton of coal. People want to think, oh, it's the taxpayers' response. We never did ask the taxpayers. We created this problem right here in Washington. So from 46 clear up until the 74 law that came in place, and then we had the bankruptcy laws of 1980 that allowed them to walk away from the legacy cost, coal mine operators, and then in 27 crash that hurt the 74 fund. So what we're asking for now is taking AML money, excess money. We've asked for basically the miners' protection is full funding for health care and for the pension. I'm told that they're willing to agree, we've heard this from Majority Leader McConnell, to agree on the health care protection. It's ridiculous because within a year to 2 years we'll be in the same boat again with the pensions. We have it paid for now. If we don't do it today, it won't be as cheap as it is going to be today. If not, it'll break the guaranteed pension fund, and it makes no sense whatsoever. So we're pushing for a full fix as we speak, and we're going to get something accomplished this time. And it's not going to be a 3 or 4 month extension Band-Aid.
One more. Senator Manchin, on that note, pension benefits, would you be open to adding any sort of provision that affects the Coal Act, and particularly the companies that haven't gone bankrupt yet?
Well, I'm considerate of all that, from the standpoint. But the bottom line is, this here is from the AML, excess funds of AML, and basically there are some transfers that we have coming. But with that being said, we should not. I mean, you're saying to give relief to the...
This would be other coal companies that have not gone bankrupt yet that would want to be included.
We understood that, but bottom line, that puts a greater financial burden on. I'm not saying that what we've done was right and the way it was done here was absolutely wrong. Put us in a financial hardship. You're just going to dig a deeper hole if you go any further. And that's what we're concerned about. But I know there's been some requests on that end. I understand that.
One more.
Let me just add to that. With regard to the process, I think it's important. Senator Manchin mentioned, and I should have as well, this effort to get legislation through the Senate was done in a manner that was entirely consistent with what Leader McConnell said we must do. He said, get a bill through the Finance Committee that obviously has to be bipartisan. It was it 18 to 8, I think it was? 18 to 8 vote. You don't see much going through that committee that has that kind of consensus. And then we'll consider it on the floor. Well, we did all of that. We had time to consider it on the floor, plenty of time at the end of the year. We were working on it night and day to try to get a vote. And once again, the Republican leadership dropped the ball. I thought that on January 21st, with both houses under Republican majorities and a Republican president who talked a lot about coal miners, I thought it would go through, or they would at least try to get it through as fast as possible. Nothing. No progress at all. So we're going to keep insisting on getting this done, because these miners, we gave them a promise as a country. They kept every promise that they were supposed to keep. They kept their promise to their company, did hard work, some of them for decades. They kept their promise to their family to provide for them. Some of them even had to keep a promise to their country to fight in World War II and Korea and Vietnam and every conflict going forward. And so they've kept all the tough promises. The government's got the easy promise. We've got the easy. All we got to do is put your hand up and vote yes. That's pretty damn easy. But Joe has put his finger on the inequity of it. But we've done our part. It's time for Republicans to get this over the goal line.
Let me say one thing as Bob's talking. These benefits were negotiated. Think about every contract that was negotiated. This was part of the negotiating. This was part of the benefit package. They gave up a lot in income so they could have the benefit package. Now all of a sudden, because of bankruptcy courts and closures, if you will, they walk away with nothing. Nothing. Just wrong.
Thanks, Bob.
I will, let me add, your question was about the respirable dust concentration, and that is part of the my bill is the pilot program, and it requires a 5-year retrospective review by the Secretary of Labor to see whether the current standard ought to be lowered, just based on the actual experience. It starts in 2016 and goes through August 1st, 2021. Okay. May we all live that long.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And it's Section 201 of the bill, by the way. Okay.
Congressman, thank you. Next week, I'll read that today.